Before we dive into tonight's story, I'd love to know where you're listening from. It's always fascinating to imagine these words traveling across distances, finding you perhaps on a rainy balcony in Seattle, a sun-drenched patio in Arizona, or maybe in a quiet, lamp-lit room in London while the city sleeps outside. There is something comforting about knowing we are all connected by stories, no matter the miles between us. If this one resonates with you, if it stirs a memory or touches a quiet place in your heart, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps me continue to share these slices of life that remind us we are never truly alone in our experiences. Now, let me take you back to an evening that shifted the entire trajectory of my life. It was one of those late October afternoons when the world seems to hold its breath. The light was thick and golden, filtering through the turning leaves, casting long, stretching shadows across the yard. The air carried that distinct, crisp scent of autumn dry leaves, damp earth, and wood smoke from a distant chimney. I had retreated to the greenhouse at the back of the garden, seeking refuge from the persistent hum of the television inside the house. At 58, I found that silence is sometimes the only thing that can truly untangle the knots in your mind. I was repotting some ferns, my hands deep in the cool, dark soil, when the side gate creaked. It was a sound I knew well, a little rusty groan that always signaled an arrival. "Elena?" A voice called out, familiar and warm. I straightened up, wiping my hands on my apron. It was Daniel, my husband Mark's childhood friend. They had grown up together, played football on the same high school team, and stayed close through decades of life's unpredictable turns. I saw him often enough at barbecues or holiday gatherings, but he rarely came by on a Tuesday evening unannounced. "Daniel, you startled me," I said, stepping out of the greenhouse. "Mark isn't home yet. He's running errands in town." Daniel smiled, leaning casually against the doorframe of the garden shed. He had a way of standing that made him seem entirely at ease in the world, a contrast to the restless energy that often radiated from Mark. "That's all right," he said. "Mark said I could grab the ladder from the shed. My gutters are a disaster after that storm last week." "Of course," I replied, gesturing toward the shed. "You know where everything is?" "Probably better than I do." He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate in the cool evening air. He moved past me into the shed, and for a moment the space felt smaller, filled with his presence. It wasn't uncomfortable, just noticeable. Like when a cloud passes over the sun and the temperature drops a few degrees, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. "You've really turned this place around," he commented, looking at the rows of potted plants and the organized shelves of tools. "Last time I was back here, it looked like a tornado had hit a hardware store." I laughed, feeling a flush of pride. Well, I needed a project. Something to keep my hands busy when the house gets too quiet. Daniel turned to look at me then, really look at me. His eyes were a shade of brown that reminded me of strong coffee, direct and kind. "Still quiet inside?" He asked gently. It wasn't a prying question, not the way he asked it. It was an acknowledgement. He knew, as old friends often do, that Mark and I had been drifting. We weren't fighting. There were no slammed doors or raised voices. It was a slow erosion, a quiet widening of the gap between us until we were shouting across a canyon just to say good morning. I sighed, picking up a trowel and turning it over in my hands. "You know how it is. We're in the same house, but sometimes it feels like we're living in different time zones." Daniel nodded slowly. "I know that feeling well. My house has been quiet for a long time now." He was referring to his divorce 3 years ago. It had been amicable from what I heard, but loneliness doesn't care about the terms of the separation. It settles in just the same. We stood there for a moment in the fading light, surrounded by the smell of potting soil and old timber. There was a vulnerability in the air, a shared understanding of what it means to feel alone, even when you're not physically solitary. You always were the one who held things together, Elena, he said softly. Even back in school. You were the calm in the chaos. I looked down at my muddy boots. I think I just got good at hiding the cracks. Maybe, he said, stepping closer to inspect a vintage lantern hanging from a hook. But maybe the cracks are where the light gets in. Or so the song goes. There was no flirtation in his voice, just a simple observation, but it struck a chord deep within me. I hadn't felt truly seen in a long time. Mark looked at me, sure, but he often looked right through me to the grocery list, or the leaky faucet, or the evening news. Daniel was looking at me. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of violet and burnt orange. The crickets were starting their nightly symphony. I should let you get that ladder, I said, breaking the spell, before it gets too dark to see. Right, he said, shaking his head slightly as if waking from a daydream. Don't want to be climbing roofs in the dark? He grabbed the ladder, maneuvering it easily through the door. As he walked toward the gate, he paused and looked back. Thanks, Elena, not just for the ladder. It was nice to talk. Really talk. Anytime, Daniel, I said after he left. I stayed in the garden until the stars began to prick the velvet sky. My heart was beating a little faster than usual, a steady rhythmic thud against my ribs. It wasn't that anything improper had happened. It was simply the awakening of a part of me that had been dormant, the part that craved connection, conversation, and the feeling of being understood. That evening, Mark came home with the groceries and a story about the long line at the checkout. I listened, nodded in all the right places, and helped him unpack the bags. But my mind was still back in the garden, replaying the conversation with Daniel. Did Daniel come by? Mark asked, putting the milk in the fridge. He texted me he was grabbing the ladder. Yes, he did, I replied, keeping my tone even. We chatted for a bit. He seems good. Yeah, he's doing all right, Mark said absent-mindedly, already turning toward the living room. Glad he stopped by. He settled into his armchair, the blue light of the TV flickering across his face. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him. I loved him. I knew I did. We had built a life together, raised 2 children, weathered storms. But looking at him now, I realized how much distance had grown between the sofa and the kitchen. Between his world and mine. Over the next few weeks, the season deepened. The trees stripped themselves bare, and the mornings turned frosty. I found myself spending more time in the greenhouse, insulating the plants for winter. And every now and then, Daniel would stop by. Sometimes it was to return a tool. Other times to drop off a bag of apples from his orchard. Or just because he was in the neighborhood. We would stand by the fence or sit on the wooden bench near the hydrangeas, drinking coffee from thermoses, our breath clouding in the cold air. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his struggles with learning to cook for one, laughing at his culinary disasters. I told him about my desire to travel, to see the coast of Maine or the deserts of the Southwest, dreams I had shelved years ago. One afternoon, the sky was a heavy slate gray, promising snow. Daniel had stopped by with a book he thought I'd like, a biography of an artist we had both admired in college. I saw this and thought of you, he said, handing me the book. You used to paint, didn't you? I remember you always had a sketchbook in your bag senior year. I ran my hand over the cover, a pang of nostalgia hitting me hard. I did, a long time ago. Life just got in the way. Life has a habit of doing that, he said gently. But it's never too late to pick it up again. The talent doesn't just disappear, Elena. It waits. His belief in me was startling. I had stopped calling myself an artist decades ago, burying that identity under layers of motherhood, wifely duties, and practicalities. But here was someone who remembered that version of me. who saw it still flickering beneath the surface. I don't even know if I have any brushes left, I admitted, a nervous laugh escaping me. Check the attic, he suggested with a wink. You might be surprised what you find. That night, after Mark had gone to bed, I climbed the pole downstairs to the attic. It was dusty and smelled of cedar and old paper. I rummaged through boxes labeled Christmas decor and kids' schoolwork until I found a battered wooden box tucked in the corner. Inside were tubes of dried-up paint, a palette stained with colors from 20 years ago, and a bundle of brushes. I held a brush in my hand, the familiar weight of it sending a jolt through my fingers. It felt like shaking hands with an old friend. The next day, I went to the art supply store in town. I bought fresh paints, new canvases, and a sturdy easel. When I set it up in the corner of the sunroom, Mark walked by and paused. Taking up painting again? He asked, sipping his coffee. I thought I might, I said, bracing myself for a comment about the mess or the expense. That's nice, he said simply, and walked away. His indifference stung, but it also freed me. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing it for me, and perhaps a little bit for Daniel, who had reminded me that I was allowed to have passions that didn't involve the household. I started painting that afternoon. The first few attempts were clumsy, my hands stiff and unsure. But slowly, the rhythm returned. I painted the view from the window, the bare branches of the oak tree against the winter sky. I painted the bowl of lemons on the kitchen table. I lost hours in the sunroom, forgetting to start dinner, forgetting to turn on the evening news dot. When Daniel stopped by a week later, I invited him in to see. He stood before the easel, studying the canvas where I had tried to capture the morning light hitting the frost on the grass. Elena, he breathed. This is incredible. You've still got it? It's a little rough, I demurred, feeling shy. It's real, he corrected. It has feeling. That's what matters. He turned to me, his expression serious. You have a gift. Don't let it go dormant again. We sat in the sunroom as the afternoon waned, talking about art, about light and shadow, about the way seeing the world through a painter's eye changes everything. For the first time in years, I felt vibrant. I felt interesting. As winter settled in, my routine changed. The mornings were for painting, the afternoons for walks or chores, and the evenings ... The evenings were still quiet, but now I had something to fill my mind other than the silence. Mark noticed the change in me. You seem happier lately, he remarked one evening over dinner. I am, I said. Painting. It feels like coming home to myself. He nodded, pushing peas around his plate. I'm glad, Elena, really. He sounded sincere, but also distant, as if he were watching me from the shore while I sailed away. I wanted to reach out to pull him into this new excitement, but I didn't know how. The bridge between us felt too long, the planks too rotten. One snowy Tuesday, Daniel didn't come by. I told myself I wasn't waiting for him, but I found myself glancing at the driveway every few minutes. The next week, he didn't come either. A month passed without a visit. I ran into him at the grocery store mid-January. He looked tired, his usual brightness dimmed. Daniel, I said, approaching his cart, I haven't seen you in a while. Is everything okay? He offered a tight smile. Hey, Elena. Yeah, just ... busy. Work has been crazy, and my daughter is having some trouble back east, so I've been on the phone a lot. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. I missed our chats. He looked down at his shoes, then back at me, his eyes guarded. Me too, but maybe it's better if I don't come around as much. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Why? Because, he sighed, lowering his voice. Because I look forward to it too much, Elena, and you're Mark's wife. And I'm Mark's friend, and I don't want to complicate your life. The honesty of his words hung in the air between the cereal aisle and the bakery. He was acknowledging what we had both been carefully ignoring, that the connection between us was growing into something that threatened the boundaries of our defined roles. I see. I whispered. You're amazing. Elena, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And you're painting. Keep doing it, please. Do it for yourself. He squeezed my hand briefly, his touch warm and fleeting, and then he pushed his cart away, disappearing around the corner. I stood there for a long time, staring at a display of canned soup, feeling a profound sense of loss. But underneath the sadness, there was clarity. Daniel hadn't come into my life to be a lover or to break up my marriage. He had come to be a catalyst. He had been the mirror I needed to see myself again, to remember who I was before I became just a wife and a mother. I drove home in silence, the snow falling softly on the windshield. When I walked into the house, Mark was in his usual spot. But instead of walking past him to the kitchen, I went into the living room and sat on the sofa next to him. He looked up, surprised. Everything okay? No, I said quietly. Not really. He muted the TV, giving me his full attention for the first time in months. What is it? I feel like I've been asleep for 20 years, Mark, and I'm just waking up. And I'm scared that if we don't do something, if we don't try to find each other again, I'm going to wake up alone in this house. Even with you sitting right here. Mark stared at me, his expression softening into something pained and vulnerable. I know, he admitted, his voice rasping. I feel it too. I didn't know how to say it. I thought you were content. I was comfortable, I corrected. There's a difference. I don't want to be comfortable anymore. I want to be alive. We talked that night. Really talked. We talked until the fire in the hearth turned to ash and the house grew cold around us. We talked about the years that had slipped by, the resentments we had swallowed, the dreams we had let gather dust. It wasn't easy. There were tears and awkward silences, and moments where I wasn't sure if we would make it, but we started. The next morning, I went into the sunroom and looked at my easel. The painting of the winter tree was finished. It stood stark and beautiful against the pale sky, but at the very tips of the branches, I had painted tiny, almost invisible buds of green. The promise of spring dot, I didn't stop painting. In fact, I painted more than ever. I joined a local art guild. I started showing my work at small community fairs. Daniel didn't come by anymore, but I heard through the grapevine that he had moved closer to his daughter to help her through her tough time. I sent him a thank you card once with a picture of one of my paintings. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one. I didn't need one. His part of my story was done, and I was grateful for it. Spring eventually broke the hold of winter. The garden burst into life. The ferns in the greenhouse unfurled their fronds, and the air grew sweet with lilac and rain. One Saturday morning, Mark came into the sunroom while I was working on a large canvas, a landscape of the hills behind our house. It's good, he said, standing behind me. Really good, Elena. Thank you, I said, smiling at him in the reflection of the window. I was thinking, he started, shifting his weight nervously. Maybe we could take a trip. You always wanted to see the Southwest, right? Maybe we could drive out there. See the desert? You could paint. I could, I don't know, maybe take some photos. I used to like photography. I turned around, my brush suspended in midair. You do that? I want to, he said, stepping closer and taking my hand. His grip was firm, familiar, but there was a new intent in it. I want to be part of this waking up, Elena, if you'll let me. I squeezed his hand back. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. We planned the trip for the fall. It gave us something to look forward to, a shared project that wasn't about the house or the kids or the bills. We bought maps and guidebooks. We argued playfully about routes. We started taking evening walks together, just around the neighborhood, pointing out the way the light hit the houses or the colors of the neighbors' gardens. It wasn't a magic fix. We didn't suddenly become 20-year-old newlyweds again. We were still 58, with achy knees and set ways. But the silence in the house changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was companionable. It was the silence of two people who are reading different books in the same room, but stop every now and then to read a passage aloud to the other. Think back to that October evening often. The way the light slanted through the shed door, the smell of the earth, the sound of Daniel's voice telling me I was the calm in the chaos. I realized now that he was wrong about one thing. I didn't need to be the calm. I needed to be the storm just for a little while, to shake the dead leaves from the branches and make room for something new to grow. Life has a funny way of delivering exactly what you need in packaging you don't expect. I needed a friend, and I found a mirror. I needed a shake-up, and I got a paintbrush. I needed to lose a little bit of my security to find my voice, and now, as I sit here in my sunroom, surrounded by the smell of turpentine and oil paint, watching Mark prune the roses in the garden below, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for the second chance at my marriage, or for the art that has filled my soul, but for the realization that it is never, ever too late to change the narrative of your own life. You can be halfway through the book and decide to write a plot twist. You can be standing in the wreckage of a quiet, lonely afternoon and decide to build a cathedral out of the jabbery dots. So, to whoever is listening tonight, maybe you're feeling that itch of restlessness, that sense that the walls are closing in, that the silence is getting too loud. Maybe you're waiting for permission to pick up a brush or a pen or a map. Consider this your permission. Open the gate. Let the stranger in, whether that stranger is a new friend, a new idea, or a forgotten part of yourself. Let the conversation happen. Let the light change, because the evening everything changed for me wasn't really about Daniel or the garage or the drill. It was about me finally opening the door to my own life and inviting myself back in. And that, my friends, is a story worth living. Thank you for spending this time with me. It means the world to share these moments with you. If this story sparked a little light in your evening, please remember to subscribe and like. It helps more than you know. Until next time, keep your eyes open for the golden hour, and don't be afraid to break the silence. Good night.